quickly, like we were talking about changing narratives, right? I see your point. Yeah, the history of globalization, maybe not global history, has been dominated by one particular narrative of European, Western expansionism. But I think, through these projects we have learned about a lot of people who are thinking about the counter movement, but still a global movement. People who have been pushed by this initial globalizing force, but who have become global actors in cities who have become global actors. But we need to capture that narrative as well. So maybe we don't have to throw away, right, the argument, but just the idea, but just create more dialogue and kind of introduce a new perspective.
Yeah, I just
tell us who you are. Yeah.
Okay, Guhp from Shanghai Tsinghua University, and I just want to follow you because intrigued by this discussion about global. I want to continue on the second word, the urban. I know we have to label something like urban, but very often urban is not enough to describe our current world. Like I can never pronounce this, SACRPH, right?
Yeah.
It include regional planning. Because I'm based in the background of urban planning, and for us, very often I found it's difficult to classify my study into urban. I feel like the example I presented this morning, it is never really considered urban compared to the normal, like Western standard of the cities. And often cities and its surrounding hinterland are closely linked to each other. Like if in China you talk about city, it can mean many things. The city government governs considered among area of rural land. So is there a field called regional study? I'm not sure. In history, probably not, but in geography,
There's regional planning.
There is definitely regional planning.
So,
we are
regional studies.
planning discipline, but regional studies we call that. What is nowadays urban study and urban history? This geographer Neil Brenner from Harvard, he has this statement of planetary urbanization. So the global urban history would totally change its meaning if we consider his statement is correct.
I think it's true, and he's one of the inspirations in my mind for, and also the provocations for this research. I think he's somebody that has not read urban history, for example, very, very clearly. But just quickly on the word region, I don't believe there is a thing called regional history as a kind of subject. Region also strikes me as one of those words that can mean almost anything of almost any size. We have region area studies, which are yet another word that could be of any size. But I'm trying to think. I mean, certainly we have metropolitan history, and I think that would probably become the closest. The study of cities and the built environment that's close enough to them to sort of interact with them. Interlink with them.
Hinterland also.
And we've had hinterland, city hinterland is a very old concept.
Maybe Nature's Metropolis would be kind of an example of a book that sort of links urban to the regional to the, large, different scales. And
but that's considered like
really
a master work of urban history.
Well,
but it's also
precisely.
It's also regional.
It's a great book.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to see some masterworks in urban history come out of this. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's see, how are we doing on time? We actually have 2 more minutes, so if there's anybody else who would like to jump in. Yes, I know you've been wanting to. Come on in.
But now I feel like a lot of pressure with they get that switch.
What's your name?
I'm Ari Sammartino. I'm really interested in what you guys are doing for a couple of reasons. I started off as a German historian, so close to Guhp, but then I moved into doing comparative and American history as well. And I want to come back to that. Like, I feel like the point that you made got a little bit lost as almost like a challenge, which I actually think, but you're making a really, I think, important point that sometimes the right scale isn't the global, right? And it's important to sort of figure out as you're working on your stories. And I worry sometimes a little bit if if people are trying so hard to write global histories, if sometimes they miss that maybe in their story the national is the important lens or the local or whatever, and that just calling for kind of a humility on the part of global history towards the other potential scales. And a sort of attempt to be synthetic without overwhelming it. And towards that end as well, I wanted to come back to the question of linguistic differences, right? Because that on some level, no one can speak all languages, right? And so I was thinking about how to think about collaborative models in which people can bring different linguistic abilities to each other, and both thinking about that as the potentials of that, but also then kind of the limits of what those kinds of things can do, and maybe thinking really seriously about what does it mean for the next generation of historians to train, thinking about global models, really what kind of linguistic training should people have? How many languages should they really have? And trying to think maybe about what would sort of almost, not best practices is not the word I'm really thinking of, but something along those lines, and thinking about how to allow people to work in multiple archives with multiple kinds of sources in multiple languages without it, ballooning out of control. So that was
Terrific questions. Anybody want to answer to that? I mean, just a couple quick, very, very pedestrian things that I'd say to that. First of all, I'd love to keep on talking about the issue, especially the issue of language. I also love the idea of the global being a word that could somehow or another evoke humility. I mean, obviously it's not in the current usage, at least for I think most of us who use it here in the West. But it strikes me that it has to. It's the only word that encompasses all the other scopes. So we start with that, and then you have to prove it. In terms of language, I mean, I've already talked to Mariana about Portuguese translation of our website. I'm thinking about French very quickly, and we have members who can do many other languages. I think that's going to be essential. The other idea that's floating fairly strongly in our minds is having conferences in locations other than the West, obviously, and in fact, possibly every continent. This is what we've been thinking about. And one of the things that would be possible there would be to have more simultaneous translations with local scholars in at least a reasonable range of languages in those places. So that's something that's kind of been in the back of my mind a lot too.
And way in the future in Dreamland, multilingual publications would be very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
maybe translating, in terms of teaching, translate primary sources for almost, that people could use in their classes. It could be almost crowdsourced. That would be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the fact that we have so many images, historical images of cities now, access to them at a quick touch. I mean, that helps with the teaching a huge amount. I found, but making that more of a concentrated thing we could put on too.
It was just very quick in response to the first part of your question about the risks of looking for the global when maybe the story is not really about global. And I think that risk is particularly big for, in a way, historians or academics, because our lives are very transnational and global and involve this. So I think there could be the risk of, in a way, looking for this kind of transnational perspective or global perspective, a kind of almost biographical way of thinking about our own lives, or in using that to look at the way in which the world works. And I think that's an important thing for us to know when the global is something that works and when it's not. But if you can say that this is not global, then that's an important thing to be able to say in comparison with the other things. So then that's an important. It's not a parochial story. It's simply a story where the fact that it is not global, in a way, has shaped this place.
Well,
and if I could just to conclude, to reiterate that I think the questions that are coming up here is exactly why we decided to create this project, right? And to enable these collaborations of people who speak different languages, who are familiar with different archives, with different places and time periods, who think globally who think locally, who combine that, right? And this was the experience Emmett and I had that was so enriching, right? In our history associations, often what happens is we present our work and someone says, well, I studied this and you didn't talk about X, right? And it's like, it's that just reinforcing the fact that people are working so right in this isolated way and have this resistance to collaborate. And in our workshops, I don't think that ever happened. And people were like, oh, this is fascinating, and what you're saying helps me think about this. And there was a much more sense of the potential of collaborative thinking. And right, so I think that's what we're hoping to continue enabling.
Exactly. Well, I'll let Mariana have the last word, other than just to say that if you're going to continue the conversation a little bit or even talk about our next face-to-face big initiative, which will actually probably happen at the IPHS in Yokohama, if any of you are going there, let us know right away, because we are trying to assemble some panels as we speak for that. But other questions, and if you want to have dinner later on, look for us. A couple of us will be doing that as well today. So thank you so much. This was enormously enlightening for me. And just think about how we've had these conversations where we had actually your own work in discussion on top of it all, where your actual research was being discussed, and you're wrestling with the evidence to the analysis kind of link. That's the kind of thing we want to move towards. So I appreciate it. Thank you again. Sure.